The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to have a chat with Faith. So Faith, if you could tell me when and where you were born, and if you could describe to me what it was like where you grew up, the schools you went to, and the education that you received.
I would be happy to explore that with you, Tim. Thank you so much. I guess if we're going that far back, my birthday is actually coming up. I was born in February in 1968, the first part of a matching set. And we were born in Whitehorse, Yukon, Canada. So up in the North Country. My father was stationed there as he was in the Air Force, in the Canadian Air Force.
Wasn't a prospector then?
Yeah, not a prospector, no.
Did he do that in his spare time?
That's right. From Whitehorse, he transferred with the whole family. So we are the second and the third kids of there's three siblings. So there's my brother and my twin sister. And we moved to Manitoba, to a place called Shiloh, which is a Canadian Forces base just outside of Brandon, Manitoba. And that's where my dad decided that the services were being blended. And he didn't want to spend the rest of his life kind of leaving the Air Force and living in a trench and doing those kinds of Army camp activities. So he started applying for new roles, and he got on with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police as a telecommunications officer. And he took a full-time position with the RCMP, which is our federal policing in Canada. And he took a job with them in Brandon. And that's kind of where I grew up, in a prairie town, surrounded by wheat fields and just the most gorgeous scenery and lakes everywhere. They call it the province of the lakes. Mm-hmm. And, as a twin in a time when twins weren't as common, there wasn't that, the amount of fertility drugs that are now kind of populating the multiple births. So we were identical twins, mirror image, which also means that our personalities are slightly different as well. And we went to school together all the time. So we were our own best friends.
I guess you played tricks on lots of people.
We played tricks on a lot of people. Almost impossible to tell apart. Once you got to know us, obviously our personalities are a bit different. And so I would say that I'm a bit of the risk taker, or the courageous one of the two of us. And, I even in the womb, I probably said to my sister, hey, I think there's a mother. Give us a few minutes. And then if I'm not back in 5 minutes, follow me, and she's always been the cautious one. And she took another hour to join me. And, into the school system, we went in a public school system and walked the halls, kind of stressing people out with this, ability to just interchange classes. And I remember, when we were in the same class, we somewhat dressed alike, and we certainly spent all our time together. And later on, they decided they should split us apart because we would make friends if we were not in the same class, which I think was just a recipe for disaster, quite frankly, because that was the moment I realized I wasn't that fond of math, and she wasn't that fond of phys ed. So I was able to do all of the phys ed classes, and she could take all of my math classes, which seemed like such a great idea at the time until she quit school at age 16, and I was going to carry on, and now I have to catch everything up. So let that be a lesson to you. There might be some things that you can get away with, but usually the consequences come back to bite us. I remember kind of growing up and just being a really tight family. I mean, we camped a lot as a family in a tent trailer. And we were out and about, drinking powdered skim milk and Spam in a can and all of those, crazy lifestyle things. But my dad and my mom were such a great role models, and they really believed in family. And so every holiday was spent, driving hours and hours and hours with a tent trailer behind us and praying that it wouldn't rain, and we'd have to set the canvas trailer up in the rain. And my dad reminding us that we could have it worse. We could be sleeping on the ground. So They've got
Yeah.
this really great, very family oriented. We spent summers with grandparents and lots of cousins. My dad came from a large family, also
Mm.
a prairie family, but in Saskatchewan, one province over. But being only one province, you're able to spend a lot of time as cousins living together. So,
Yeah.
you start to have this really big team environment around you all the time. Where I number one, being born part of a team. I don't know how to not be part of, and then adding the cousins into the mix is always kind of a real fun. I can remember the one grandfather was actually from England as well, and he believed he was an orphan his entire childhood. His dad told him he was an orphan, there was no one else, which wasn't entirely true. I think some of us spin our
Mm.
own stories. And so he always wanted to be surrounded by family. And so he used to, put on these retreats or get-togethers when we were kids, and we're, fielding two teams. There was that many cousins, and he just loved having, baseball team oriented people around, and just kind of
Mm.
just really playful and teaching us about having a sense of humor and never letting the things that stress us out, I think, from day to day, get under your skin. I mean, my grandfather was a very tall, stoic man who, he was trying to create a living during the dirty 30s. I mean,
Mm.
it was not an easy existence. And he said, you were expected to have the farm or go to war. And so he had a farm. And so he used to say, if you can't laugh at what life's throwing at you, then you're going to have some serious problems along the way. And my mom's mom on the other side, she just turned 101. And I remember when she was in her 70s and 80s kind of telling us my grandfather actually died when I was 11. So she's been alone a really long time.
Mm.
And I remember her saying, when you grow old, just make sure that you're not one of those people who complains about everything. No one wants to talk to a complainer. So just those really great role models in life that remind us to just not take ourselves so seriously, and then also be generous with praise and generous with joy and generous with gratitude, and that good things in life just continually come back to you. So, there I was, in high school, feeling very alone when my twin sister left. I was
Mm.
16 years old, and what am I going to do now? And I
What
had
did
this
she do?
well, she found a man, and she kind of decided she wanted to do that instead for a while.
Oh.
She was very rebellious at that stage, and so, and I think always being under the microscope as a twin is a bit hard on you at times. You're not
Mm.
your own identity. I mean, I can remember, I think I was probably in 4th grade before I realized my name wasn't Faith and Fern. It was just Faith. We just used to run them together. So it's much, or the girls. Where are the girls? You
Yeah.
never really have your own identity. So at 16, I had this opportunity to go to glider camp, and with the reserves, and I was gonna just learn to be a glider pilot. And I thought, well, that'll be super fun. Again, back to risk taking, and it should be just filled with opportunity. And so I went to Gimli, Manitoba, which is just outside of Winnipeg, which is the capital of Manitoba.
Mm.
And I spent a summer in the heat running on a dirt track, chasing gliders, and learning to be a pilot, and fell in love with my first love. We're coming up on Valentine's Day here in North America. So, we're talking to all things love these days. And you have to wonder how many of us remember our first loves. And
Mhm.
here was this, amazing glider pilot, that was going to teach me. And he was tall and dark and handsome and much older than me. And he was a bit smitten with me. So, we ended up forging this relationship. And, I graduated high school, and I was in college. And I was taking my medical secretary because my mom figured, you should do something you can lean back on. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I didn't know how many years I
Yeah.
wanted to spend in post-secondary. And so both my parents are very practical, very pragmatic people. And they said, no matter what you do, you're going to need to learn to type. So, like, go get us secretaries and you'll always be employable. And it's funny, they gave that advice and I thought I wanted to go to fire college. I was going to go be a firefighter and they said, well, it's lots of night shifts and you might not love it. Okay, I'll be a secretary. It's like- and yeah, so
So did you graduate as a secretary?
I did, yeah. And I started in a clinic for a whopping $6 an hour back in the day. And it was my full-time job. And I was working day shift, which I was told was going to be amazing. And I've often looked back and thought if I'd have been a firefighter, I might have started at $20 an hour. It's like it's a bit of a stark contrast. But yeah, and then I my pilot boyfriend kept flying back to come and visit me and finally convinced me I should move with him across the prairies to the east side of the Rocky Mountains into Alberta. And I was such an exciting time. I'd never really traveled anywhere. I grew up in a tent trailer. And here's this very wealthy oil man who was going to take me to 5-star hotels and restaurants. And I was going to live this life that I just really dreamed of becoming accustomed to. And
So
so it's just an interesting time. And then we had some kids together. And then I realized that one day I came home and found him in bed with his secretary and realized even being born a twin, I don't like to share that much. So I started over.
so did you get your pilot's license?
I did get my glider pilot's license and I started to do my small engine license, this, learn to fly a
Yeah.
Cessna. But obviously, when that relationship kind of came apart, that ended as well. So I, was a single mom trying to figure out how to raise 3 kids all by myself and start over, and, you just think about where you end up in life, the choices you make. And, is there this opportunity to go back for I'm going to use a golf metaphor. Can I go back and take a mulligan? Can I do a do-over on this? Because I'd like to make some different choices. I would go to fire college. And I would just maybe take a different lane.
Yeah. I mean, did you ever have to fall back on your secretarial training?
Oh my gosh, my parents were so right. Don't you hate admitting that? It's just like sometimes our parents are so right. I have used it more than I will ever use probably anything else that I could have taken training in. And it didn't really matter that I had a medical focus in that. Just the skill of being able to take minutes and being able to be able to, so now as a writer, being able to keyboard effectively and to know how to edit your material and just the skill set that you learn, in this program. And, it was a year-long program. I think people are doing them now in 16 weeks, but I mean, I studied for a whole year to get this designation. And I use
guess
it
it
with
was
everything. Who knew we'd go virtual in our lives, back then? That wasn't a
back then.
thing.
I mean, traditional typewriter. I mean,
Yeah, push in
ASDF,
the slide.
GH, just bang.
And you had the carbon paper, and if you made a
Yeah,
mistake, it was always at the bottom and you had to
yeah.
start over.
And
Crazy
what about
times.
shorthand? Can you
Oh,
still do
yes.
shorthand?
Faulkner shorthand. And in fact, I had secured myself a job in a hospital working as a clerk. And then I took a part-time job. I had these 3 kids and I was trying to, buy a house and really prove that I could do it on my own. And I remember taking up a part-time gig, taking the minutes for the municipal council. So for all of their night meetings, I would go in and I would take the minutes. And then on my breaks during my day job, I would literally type up these minutes and get them sent back so that I was able to earn, the income from both places and try to get ourselves to a place where we had a foothold and we could get a house and we could have a life potentially with furniture and some food on the table and all those important things. Yeah. So yes, I've used it extensively. And even now, I belong to, I've always belonged to a lot of service clubs. And right now I belong to Rotary International here in the Okanagan. And it's such a wonderful place, but I find myself by default writing agendas and taking minutes because, meetings just go on way too long and somebody has to, herd the cats a little bit. So
Yeah.
yeah,
There's
I would say
always a need for a secretary.
always. And so,
No
exactly
matter
what they
who.
said, right? You can always fall
Yeah.
back on those skills. Yeah.
So let's move on a little bit. So you moved to the West Coast. You had 3 kids, and your marriage fell apart. What was the first job you had when you left college?
As I said, when I left college, I got on with a clinic, and so a medical clinic, and that was my first job. And they were wonderful people there. I mean, but it was back in the day of carbon paper, and our medical
Yeah.
files were very long, and I always seemed to make a mistake at the end. But you do learn to be a much better typist when you have to redo your work enough times, and so that was good. And then when I followed my partner out to Alberta, I had been told by unemployment that I had to apply for work. And I thought, I just want the summer off. Like I'd been working part-time jobs since I was 12. And I was like, I just, maybe I could just take the summer and go to the beach. And it would be so wonderful. Wouldn't it be wonderful just to have a whole summer? But unemployment had rules and they wanted us to
Mm.
apply, prove you were applying for work. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to apply for work that I'm not qualified for. you know and that'll give me the opportunity to be able to present, very strategic in the way I think. And so I thought, well, I'll apply for an airline position, and I was hired in 2 weeks, and I was hired to do baggage claims. and and they were just changing over the uniforms, and so they wanted somebody who could come in and change over the uniforms and then do baggage claim, because obviously, being a good typist, I had some skills in being able to fill in paperwork.
Mm.
And I thought, well, it makes me a little money. And then they told me about the flight benefits. And I was like, okay, well, that if I get flight benefits, well, so I did that for 5 years. And then I left that position kind of around the same time that my marriage fell apart. And I went back to healthcare.
So hang on, let's just explore that a little bit. Flight
Yeah.
benefits. So
Well,
what were the flight benefits, and did
Yeah.
you use them extensively?
Oh my gosh, I wish that I had used them extensively. But they had this little clause in the contract that said if you didn't show up for work for your shift, it was grounds for dismissal. So it was like, but my parents, they used them extensively. Um, they'd never really flown anywhere. And suddenly here I was, gifting them these flight passes, and you could fly standby, and there were lots of flights to choose from, but you could fly standby at really the cost of taxes. And that was so great for my parents. And so they got to travel all over the place because they had more flexibility in terms of being able to book days off. But I remember my father once saying to me, he'd come back from, I think they went to England, and he'd come back and he'd been on, 8 or 9 different countries already that year. And one of the guys that was working with him said, "Did you guys win the lottery or something?" He goes, "Oh, way better. My daughter works for the airline." And I think they literally cried the day that I left. I'm absolutely certain there were tears the day that I left.
Did they give
the
you a
airline.
hard time for leaving?
Yeah. Like, why would you leave such a great job? Well, I'm glad that you were really enjoying it. So yeah, and then I went to healthcare again, and I got a job at the hospital, and it was good, but it was also the same time that the premier of the province had done was doing a lot of healthcare cuts, and so it became really cutthroat. It was a really challenging place to work, and people were, they were trying to undermine one another's performance in order to secure their own positions, because there was just so much of the money being funneled out in order to pay the bills.
Bit older.
It was yeah,
Backstabbing.
yeah, lots of backstabbing, and very stressful and quite a toxic work environment. And so, my mom I don't think I mentioned my mom was a nurse, and
So was
and
it
my
the
dad was.
NHS then?
Yeah, yeah. So I just kind of
The, N-
following my
the, N-
parents.
the NHS over here is there's an awful lot of toxic management, which is
Yeah,
why a lot of people leave the
leave,
NHS.
leave in droves. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I shot my resume, which I think many people do when they're working in toxic environments. And you really have to decide how fiercely independent you're going to be. Um, because there's just, I think there are a lot of us that feel helpless, and that we feel almost trapped in careers. And
Mm.
if something is going really poorly, or just, you're staying awake every single night freaking out or stressing out about the work that you're doing and having to go to work. If you're getting up in the morning and kind of thinking, man, who's on the shift? Do I have to work today? Can I take a day off? It's probably time to drop your resume.
Yeah.
Life is
Calling
way
on
too
the biff.
short. Yeah. So I shot my resume, and I secured a job in law enforcement following two parents. And I became a municipal officer and started doing traffic enforcement and bylaw enforcement, and a lot of that kind of work that was, again, back to conflict, baggage claims, toxic workplace, and now, into law enforcement where the only people you deal with are in conflict. And so I became a peace officer there and saw the underbelly of society, and I really enjoyed that work for a long time. It was different every single day. It had lots of variety, and there was just this sense that I was making a difference. Of course, they
Mm.
beat that out of you really quickly in about 5 years.
So were you working in an office just processing
No,
stuff,
no,
or were you out on?
I was a uniform
Oh, you was out on
officer.
the right. Yeah,
Yeah, I was a
jumping
uniform police.
in a squad car and going out nicking
Yeah,
people.
yeah. And so
That sounds
great.
like a
And
lot of
again, my
fun.
secretarial work came in handy because they took all the stenos away with a budget cut. And so we were responsible for doing our own paperwork. So, it's, back to that, landing
Yeah,
on
get the
something that will
paperwork
serve.
done very quick, and then you can get back out and nick somebody else.
Exactly. And I really did like it, and I rose through the ranks there pretty quickly, and I became the president of the Law Enforcement Association. And it was a really great time for a while. And then
Mm,
I started to realize I was burning out. It was getting to be pretty stressful, although I had a lot of fun along the way. And if you don't mind,
mm,
I'm happy to share a couple of the stories. But um,
mm,
I got injured on the job in December of '97, and I had gone to a call, and a guard dog was at this location, and I didn't realize it was a guard dog, and he didn't realize I was trying to help him. But he was a senior guard dog. He's a Saint Bernard. He was quite huge and quite filthy. He had a seatbelt for a collar, and I was trying to check him to see if he had any tags. And as I started to pull my arm away, he latched on and lifted me right up off the ground and shook me and did all kinds of massive damage to my arm. And so I was then put on light duties. And the interesting thing when you have a government job is, no one ever just sends you home to wait it out like they did with the pandemic, but they
mm.
want you to do light duties. But I couldn't type. So the only thing they could do is put me on the phone. And I believe sarcasm is a gift that should be shared openly with as many people as possible. And so I remember taking the first call as February, and I took this call, and it was snowing very, very heavily. And this gentleman on the other line said, "Officer, can you tell me when it'll stop snowing? So I need to get to Revelstoke," which was across the Rocky Mountains. And I said, "Well, one moment, let me put you on hold and I'll get God on the other line." And my boss, I could just hear him in the background. He was just like, "You did not just say that." And I said, "Well, it's all in the delivery." He says, "Well, the guy's not going to hold." And I said, "Well, the red light begs to differ." And he said, "Well, how long are you going to make him hold?" And I said, "Well, until I get God on the other line." And I got this, that sound that people make when they're intensely frustrated with you. And it just kind of sounds like, and I'm like, okay. So I looked up the weather, And then I got him back on the line and I said, hey, it looks like the radar shows that the weather's going to lift here in another couple of hours. I'd give it another hour past that for the plows to get out and clear the highway. And then you should be good to go. Just drive according to conditions. And I hung up the phone and he just shook his head and just said, like, this cannot continue. And I'm like, this answering the phone, and I'm like, giddy up, maybe I'm going to get that summer off as I'd always hoped for. And he said, take a course. I want you to take a course. And I'm like, oh, does it have to be work related? Can it be any course? And he said, just pick a course. So I took a look and I said, oh,
lifeguard.
Yeah.
Lifeguard at the beach.
Yeah. Well, close. I said, I want to take hypnosis. And he said, what? And I said, well, you said any course. It's starting in a couple of weeks. And so, and I had no idea at the time how invaluable that training would be. And they were doing a pilot with the RCMP, the Calgary City Police, and the Edmonton City Police. We're all amalgamating their training branch, and they were going to see if they could use guided imagery to enhance performance for new recruits, reduce the fear. But I started to learn a lot in that class about human behavior. And that class led to another class in neurolinguistics. And then that class led to another class in crisis negotiating. And then that class led to mediation and conflict resolution. And it was like this whole world opened up for me, because I started to realize how valuable knowing how human behavior is structured and how to communicate to it could benefit so many people in my line of work. And so then I created a course while I was still rehabbing. I created a course called Influencing with Integrity. And I started to teach all of those officers who were riding a desk because they had so many complaints about their bad attitudes. And, so if you had too many complaints about bad attitude, they kind of brought you away from your service work and put you on the desk. And I said, if you give me 5 days, I can get you back in the field and I'll teach you some things. And so I started teaching that course. And that was kind of the beginning of me in this training, speaking and training world. And then that led to, working for the Justice Institute and doing a ton of training in the post-secondary environment around the things that I had learned because I had so much experience behind the curtain. I understood what was getting in the way. And I had so much insight into managing conflict, but I'm also a team player. And so I always want to help the team kind of become better, more cohesive, less unnecessary conflict and stress that happens on teams all the time, where the egos get in the way, and to really help people have fun again. If we were back doing good work and really functioning in a highly productive way, that it would benefit everyone. You're going to spend a lot of hours at work. You should at least have fun doing it, or at least feel like it's a valuable exchange of time.
Yeah, I'm fully behind that. I have this thing about work. I mean, I don't work any longer other than doing this stuff because I'm retired. But always, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, find something else that you are going to enjoy doing.
I once heard a speaker
take liberties.
say, I heard a speaker once say, when you feel that you're not enjoying your work, remember that you are standing in somebody else's dream job. And that has really been a compass for me in terms of, I think some of us are just not brave enough to leave a really safe job with pension and benefits and risk all of that for something that may or may not work out. And I think that's the biggest challenge. But understand that if you're not enjoying your work, neither are the people you're interacting with, because you're bringing that level of bitterness and anxiety and stress and anger, impatience level to your job. And so every person you touch now is impacted in a negative way, a caustic way, because of your unhappiness. And, so I think that we have some responsibility to fix that and either reinvest in the work that we're doing in a new way, or completely leave it and resurrect ourselves some other strategy. We just don't, we don't have the time to sit around and hate our lives and then
Absolutely.
right, and then blame others for that.
Life
Yeah.
is far too short to muck about with it.
Oh, way too short.
If you're not
Yeah.
enjoying life, if your cup's not half full to overflowing, then you're doing something wrong.
Just do something else, for heaven's sakes, spice it up. If you can't leave that job, and some people can't, I understand.
Yeah.
I was a single mom before I married an incredible human. And, I'll be married to him for 28 years this year. I mean, he's just been fantastic in my life, a really great cheerleader and a supporter. And he does, in fairness, let me, gives me the safety net. When I say let, not like gives me permission,
Yeah.
but that he pays the bills so I can, right? So I can explore other
Mm.
opportunities. And vice versa. I looked after him for a lot of years while he was looking to land somewhere. So, it's that nice partnership that I think I was always looking for, that I had with my twin sister.
Mm.
But, I think that we need to fiercely guard our mental health in a way that we need to become ambassadors for our own lives. And I think a lot of us are so accustomed, especially lately, to outsourcing decision making. We outsource we wait for somebody else to give us permission, or we wait for someone else to tell us
Mm.
what to do, or we wait for that moment. Well, we'll know. How will you know? And so I built my business on the side, and I suppose I did kind of know the day that my boss walked in and said, "You still work here?" And I knew that was probably close to needing to make a choice. And then I chose the career that I thought was good, kind of keeping me excited and passionate. And so my professional speaking business started, and it was so fabulous. I mean, I had so many contracts on the books, and I was traveling to new countries, and it was way more fun than I was, when I thought that in my 20s, it was going to be amazing in those 5-star hotels and restaurants. But it was me now. I was doing things and I was contributing, and there's something immensely rewarding about creating your own path. And, the
Mm.
kids had grown up, and I didn't have that same sense of urgency to keep the roof over our heads and, food on the table. And so it just became this really great opportunity that has led to so many other wonderful opportunities. And then, I can remember being trapped in an airport. People say, I'd love to live, I'd carry your bags. No, you wouldn't. It's immensely boring. Hotels and cabs, they all look the same regardless of which country you're in. And the
Pretty
menu
much.
for room service is exactly the same in every hotel. It's just,
Not
and
exactly the same. I think it can vary quite a lot from hotel to hotel. I mean, some
it can
hotels are absolutely dire, and some
awful.
are way off the scale.
I
So
did
let's
stay one
let's
I stayed one time where it was 3 days before I got food. So, I completely agree with you. But, for the
great for
most
the
part,
diet.
yeah, for the most part, it's rubber chicken at a conference hall. And and some places are great, and you remember them. I
Yeah.
spoke in Cape Town, South Africa, and yeah, the food was, and the service. I mean, it ruined me forever. Like, everything gets measured against that level of customer service. But yeah,
So
I
let's explore what you're doing now then. Let's have a look at so we've kind of covered how you kind of moved
yeah.
into to what you're doing now. So let's look at what you're doing now.
What am I doing now? I'm doing a little bit of dabbling. No, I'm kidding. I am, I'm now teaching the things that I learned the hard way. And so I act as a consultant, as a conflict resolution specialist, and I go into organizations that are forward facing, so service oriented. Municipal government, healthcare, any of those kind of, where you can't. I always say I help organizations that can't fire their clients. right? Like, if you can't fire your client, you probably need to learn how to interface with them better.
Yeah.
And, so I certainly am helping teams with around civility and respect in the workplace and communication. So how do we get better at our communication? And it's changing so fast all the time, from digital to written to in person. And so just really helping people refine those skills, because I've been behind the curtain, so I understand the frustrations and the limitations and the boundaries that they have to contain themselves within. And so that's really great. And then I started in about 2010. I want to say about 2010, I started writing books. And my thought around that was that people were asking me to come and speak at conferences. And if I'm at a conference, if I'm consulting, you get more access to me. And so you learn the skills over time. But if I'm just speaking at a conference, people wanted a takeaway. They wanted something that would remind them. And so I started writing those books. But then I was stuck in the Chicago O'Hare Airport on a couple of canceled flights due to a snowstorm. And I was tired of reading self-help. And I was tired of the homework and the lesson plan and the lecture. And I thought, I'm going to write a book I want to read. And when I'm tired, it would still accidentally teach me something, but I want to write it from the perspective of getting people caught up in a story. And I think stories have this really wonderful quality about them that magnetize information. And we kind of drop our critical, self-loathing, self-doubting kind of thought process, and we get hooked into a story. And they're memorable, they're sticky. We remember them. And so we learn lessons. I think we learn things better when we couch them in a story, when we connect through story. And so I started including more stories in my platform speaking, but I also started writing suspense novels. And it's, so interesting. You have a protagonist who was a former peace officer and, has learned all these lessons because we write what we know. And so that first series has this female protagonist who's, good on intuition and gut feel, and not necessarily super sharp in the investigative skills, but really just has a sense about knowing when somebody's lying. And so I wrote that series, and I was just going to write one. I just wanted to prove to myself I could do it. And a bit like everything else that I've done, just try it on for a while. And if I like it, do more of it. And so I started writing that one. Then I wrote a new one. Now I'm writing a second series, which is a male protagonists, but more investigative. So now kind of the more mature, the more grown up version of the former officer who has those experiences and that education and more knowledge and is more savvy in terms of the investigative process. And so that's been really fun, kind of marrying them up, but helping people understand human behavior by being caught up in the story. And so that's been a really great exploration. And I'm still, as obviously COVID affected all of us. So I started narrating my own books. And so now I
was going
do
to come on to that. So how did the sort of the lockdowns and all the rest of it impact your business? Because I guess you're working for yourself by this time.
Yeah. And in fact, next year I'll be 20 years in this business, which is almost unheard of, particularly for me. But in this industry, it's a tough one to sustain. You're a solopreneur, you have to know everything. But yeah, I was having a great year. 2020 was going to be my best year since moving to the Okanagan. And I was excited for what was on the books and excited. I was speaking in Portugal, and I was going to Barcelona, and I was just really, I was pretty pumped with the wonderful array of work that I was getting to do. And I came back from working for the wildfire service, and the phone started ringing, and it was all the cancellations, and everything just started like dominoes falling. And thankfully for me, I had been already coaching because we'd moved to the Okanagan in the end of 2015. I had such a business in the other province that I had already moved a lot of that work, my consulting work, online. And so when it fell, I was able to sustain the virtual portion of my one-to-one work, but the one-to-many work went to zero, and I probably lost $300,000 just in 2020 that from what was on the books. And
Yeah.
that was a big impact, and a big hit to the ego. And, what am I going to do now? And of course, at the beginning, you thought, well, we're only going to be shut down for 2 weeks. And
Yeah.
that's what they told everybody. Just
3
go home.
weeks to flatten the curve.
Right. And then 3 years later. And I
Yeah.
would say we're still trying to come back from that. There's a lot of the big conferences have had to downsize, and it's a pretty competitive, cutthroat market out there right now. It feels a lot like those days in healthcare when the market was being cut, because everybody's trying to get back to work, and so they're saying
Yeah.
horrible things about each other, which
Well,
helps no one.
well, not everybody's trying to get back to work. I think there's an awful lot of people quite happy to work from home and
Oh yeah.
work from home. Yeah. So how productive they are is it's contentious at the best
I have
of
a
times.
theory about that. So, Tim, if you were productive before, you're probably very productive at home.
Yeah.
But if you were a person who was surfing the net and watching Facebook and playing Candy Crush while you were at work and just trying to look busy, then you're doing the same
Yeah.
thing when you're at home. So,
Yeah.
I've been working from home since 2004. And I really am grateful for my 6-second commute. I grab a coffee, and if I've got people on virtually or a virtual conference, I love that I can take a break and just go get something to eat, or I can take the dogs for a walk midday. But I'm also fiercely driven. And I know that I'm ambitious and I'm driven and I'm organized and I'm productive. And I don't have small children at home. And I think, small children really impact how you regulate. I think the biggest challenge today
Yeah.
for a lot of leaders is they don't know how to lead a remote team. And so, there's it's a new way of thinking. And so they want to get everybody back to work and going down the lane that's familiar. And I think that familiar can be also very boring and lacks the innovation that's needed for us to move into the next age. I mean, we're moving into we're in the age of disruption, and we're moving into the AI age, where artificial intelligence is going to run the world a lot more so than it has been. We got to learn how. Leaders have to step up and take some training and invest. I mean, I invested in a lot of my training just personally. And I think we have to get back to investing in ourselves again and say, if I'm going to compete, if I'm going to participate, not even compete, but participate, I'm going to have to get good at things. I can no longer say, well, I don't know how to check my phone, or I don't know how to be on Zoom, or I don't know how to do these things. During COVID, I taught my 100-year-old grandmother how to be on FaceTime and with an iPad. And, she's 100. If you're younger than that, there are no excuses.
None at all. So it brings us right up to date. Right up to date. What are you up to nowadays?
I'm writing. I'm about to release my 3rd book in the Declan Kilgary series called Masterclass, because everyone on social media is running a masterclass. So I thought that would be a great thing to write about. And so it's suspense still, cozy suspense, but he's the adjunct professor teaching criminology. And so that's been really fun. So that's releasing. I just released in December, I released a new book called Fractures, which is a book on narcissism, gaslighting, and entitlement inside families. Because I think it's one thing to teach people how to navigate that in the workplace, but if you never have an escape from it, it's a very different game. And so I wrote that book to really help people recognize what's happening to them, because I think when you are surrounded by toxic behavior in your family, it's hard to distinguish what's real and what's not real. And to know, sometimes I think we blame ourselves inside families, and we think, what am I doing to cause this? And so just recognizing what some of those symptomatologies are, and then what you can do with that information. So that book came out in December. I'm getting back to work a little bit, which is Wonderful. I'm starting to
Mm,
get back on stages again and realizing, because it's funny, after 3 years, I was really wondering if maybe it was time for a new career change again. And but then I got back on the stage and I realized I absolutely love helping people. And it's still a big part of my DNA is to contribute and
yeah.
to connect and to help people realize that a lot of the stress and the tension and the conflicts in their lives are unnecessary, and that they, in some small ways, can shift how much of it is consuming their hours, and manage to navigate it little bit more resourcefully. So I'm teaching civility a lot. That seems to, since COVID, civility is a hot topic on teams.
Mm,
It's really become this place where there's so much burnout and so much frustration and so much resentment. Impatience levels are so high. People are vibrating, customers are vibrating at a really, there's not a lot of white space anymore. So I'm doing a
mm.
lot of that work, just really how do you navigate that level of intensity? And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to help where I can in terms of people who have no escape from it. And I'm doing a lot of work one-on-one with people who have met me at different things, and they're coming back and saying, I need some help. I'm at a place now where the conflicts are so high. So I'm doing lots of leadership communication coaching, and a couple of the local colleges have picked me up to do some adjunct work and around human behavior. And I'm still taking courses all through COVID. I studied neuroplasticity. Other people watch Netflix, and I took classes. One cannot learn it enough. And then I just finished a certification course in digital content writing. So that's been really fun as well. Yeah.
Ah, brilliant. So that's where you are nowadays then.
Busy brain.
So, yeah, keeps you out of mischief.
Well, that and my two golden retrievers you've probably seen wandering back and forth going,
Yeah.
are we going outside? Like, is there a moment?
um, So, Faith, that's been fascinating. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's easy to talk about ourselves, isn't it?
Hmm.
Even the
I
things
do
we
it a
don't want
lot.
to tell.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something that I try and perfect is to eke out little nuggets of information people don't really talk about.
That's right. It's more interesting. I truly believe in, connection over content sometimes, and
Yeah.
stories help us connect. So I'm very, very pleased with what you're doing. I'm looking forward to following your podcasts and catching up on what other
Thank you so
people's
much.
lives are about. It's such a nice piece to hear who people are, not just what they do.
Yeah, that's terrific. So, thank you once again.
Thanks so much, Tim, for having me.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.